Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're allowed to get on the runway now, right? So fasten your seatbelts to the world of data sharing. Um, so to start, got data. How many of us here and online have got data? Who works with data? Right? Trick question. It's a tech conference. It's everyone. Okay, next question. How many of us share the data? Do we share it with our colleagues? Do we share it to any external entities? Who shares data? Okay, half of us here. So that's what the topic today is about, sharing data, right? And see if the clicker is not working. All right. Well, next slide. Sorry, more technical difficulties. Exactly. Okay, perfect. So, in just this year alone, in 2023, right, we've had a lot of data sharing come in. Many of us are familiar with the new NIH DMS, Data Management and Sharing Policy, that many of our sites worked on frivolously and extensively, and that is to promote scientific data sharing. Similarly, there was the data exchange framework that also went into effect earlier this year, not shown on the slides, but we'll continue talking about it, that promotes the sharing of healthcare data as well as physician data, those smaller clinics in the state of California. And it just promotes an accelerated process to share that with government entities and social services as well. And most recently, again, not on the screen shown, but just last week, the EU and the US entered a data sharing framework, privacy framework as well, to accelerate the way that companies between the EU and the US are sharing their data, and then mitigating, well, not mitigating, but making easier those administrative burdens between sharing the data. So data sharing is really on the horizon. A lot of us are doing a lot of work within this realm, especially just in these 7 months alone. And so looking ahead, how do we promote innovation through data sharing with external entities and our internal collaborators while being responsible in that way? So by now, I'm sure you're thinking, well, who is this person on the stage, right? Hello, good morning. I'm Helena Mezgova, and by training, I'm a bioethicist, but in practice, I'm a senior data compliance specialist with the EIA Enterprise Information and Analytics Data Compliance Team. I'm joined by my colleagues, Kim Romero and Trisha Choa, and we support advising and consulting on data use, data access, and data management for the UCSF community. The EIA Enterprise Information and Analytics is housed within the central IT department. And so we help facilitate internal and external data sharing, data compliance solutions, and process development. And then we also facilitate the review of higher data sharing engagements by the IT Governance Committee on Enterprise Information and Analytics. More on that to come. And so what's on the journey ahead of us? So to begin, I'll provide a historical overview of, and when I say historical, we're really going to go 5 years back to the Office of the President report that came out on health data governance. And then we'll talk about UCSF's implementation of this report. So external data sharing, internal data sharing, how we've automated this process, and then some of the conclusions, lessons learned, and looking ahead. I do kindly ask that we save the questions for the end of the presentation. And so how many of us are familiar with the UCOP report for the health data governance that came out in 2018? A couple hands here. Okay, perfect. So that report more or less said that UC has a responsibility. We have a responsibility to analyze and share data in order to generate new knowledge and insights, where existing laws and policies may not cover that. So this group formed, this task force, had clinicians, scientists, ethicists, IT specialists, and community members all present to discuss some of these challenges. And again, UC regularly considers these opportunities to collaborate with external partners and to help analyze and produce more data because, right, our external partners might have better computing systems and the capacity to generate better outcomes for our patients and also our participants and for the UC community. But it is our role to also consider the risks in sharing this data and also mitigating those risks. So the existing regulatory and legal framework is an inadequate guide through this new terrain. And we really need to balance the legal, ethical, and social complexities in moving forward. Stuck again. Maybe the batteries are not good on this remote here. Next slide, please, if someone can. Okay, perfect. So this task force report had three foundational principles and six core principles and three foundational recommendations. And the 6 core principles for data governance included attention to the university's unique responsibility and mission. And so it's recognizing that we need to partner with these other institutions, these government agencies, these commercial entities to be able to be patient-focused and innovative. And we also have to consider justice, right? So there's a lot of inequalities in health data to date because of the pre-existing structure of how that data came about. There's a lot of mistrust in the institutions and also in the government. And so historically, we've had underrepresented samples in the data. And so moving forward, we need to consider justice, as well as active stewardship, trustworthiness, and patient engagement, and sharing data outside of UC for public benefits and promoting alignment and collaboration. And so the 3 foundational recommendations said that we need to pioneer a patient-informed, justice-based model of health data use, establish a system-wide health data office to identify, and I'm looking here because I can't see the small screen, to identify and accelerate these projects and partnerships, and then develop a criteria and a process for evaluating projects and transactions involving access to UC health data. So this talk will really focus on that point 3. How can we establish a criteria and develop a process to accelerate and also mitigate risks for these external data sharing engagements? And so UCOP established some interim operating guidelines. And one of those, the first one, was establish a standard contracting guidance for agreements in which third parties are provided access to UC health data. So this is standard operating procedures for, say, contracting units or privacy offices or XYZ. And then in addition to that, establish a tiger team. So a small team, or in our case, the IT Governance Committee on Enterprise Information and Analytics, was the team that was selected to oversee and review these high-risk data sharing engagements. And then step 3 was establish an escalation procedure and develop a simple dashboard with step 4, and issue interim guidelines, step 5. So UCSF's implementation, how did we take these UCOP interim guidelines? How did we take these principles, these recommendations, and implement them at our site? So the aims of this work were to really mitigate data sharing risks to UCSF, our patients, and our participants, to standardize the procedures for the evaluation of data sharing engagements, and ensure that sufficient security, privacy, compliance controls were established for engagements. As you can see the timeline here, we're 5 years in and we're still in enhancing the process. In the beginning was really process establishment. So after the report came out, the Chancellor of UCSF, Sam Howgood, reached out and said, we need to implement these at our site. And it took a group of key stakeholders and senior leadership, which was also led by Dr. Jennifer Grandis, Joe Bangford, alongside others, to really sit down and talk about and discuss how are we going to implement these recommendations at our site. So in the first few months, it was really about emailing various departments. Do you have a representative available to join the IT Governance Committee on Enterprise Information and Analytics, EIA? Are you willing to participate in these discussions? So this was very volunteer-led in the beginning stages. And as you can see from November 2018 to March 2020 was really about establishing this process, how are we going to review high-risk data sharing engagements? And it, again, moving into the process enhancement phase where those conversations then trickled into how do we standardize this approach, create forms, XYZ. So step one, UCSF applied the UCOP standard operating contracting criteria for agreements. This is pretty standard, I would say, across sites, right? We want to make sure that if anyone could view the health data that's written in the terms and terms and conditions of the agreement. We want to make sure that the third party must be prohibited from re-identifying the data. We want to make sure that they're not selling the data, XYZ. So we applied those UCOP standards at UCSF already. Where UCOP mentioned establishing a tiger team, we actually created a subgroup of the IT Governance Committee on Enterprise Information and Analytics. So we already had that governance structure in place, but instead we took a portion of that group to create this subgroup to review this. And this included, and still includes to this day, representatives from data compliance, our team, UCSF faculty, health leadership, the Human Research Protection Program, otherwise known as the IRB, IT Security and Policy, the Industry Contracts Division, the Library, UCSF Legal, Privacy, Research, and School of Medicine Technology. So that's a pretty large group of folks and a diverse expertise across the board to assist with the review of all of these engagements. And so the IT Governance Committee on Enterprise Information Analytics meets weekly when there is a data sharing engagement to review. We require that submissions come in on Wednesdays by noon of each week. And if they do, they will be placed on that Friday upcoming agenda. And data sharing agreements that meet the escalation criteria are the ones that come in to us. And so the escalation criteria, as you can see here, we've refined it to include 3 steps. One of them is sharing any UC protected health information outside of an IRB approved research study, the sharing of any UCSF P3 or P4 data. P3 includes the identified data. P4, of course, is going to be your PHI, PII. And then there's also 3 steps, right? With any commercial entities, any entity determined to be higher risk because of using a visual compliance software. And then lastly, this is the newest point that we added, is any individuals or entities located in a sanctioned country list. And so we work with export control on this point. An export control officer would be present at the meeting to really analyze the risks with sharing with this nation. And lastly, if any of the outside sites are being granted access to any of the UCSF enterprises, data sources that include P3 or P4 data, such as Apex, the clinical de-identified data warehouse, etc. When the step said, create a simple form to intake these processes, we utilized SharePoint to track our agreements. Is it the best thing out there? Subject to discussion, but it works for us right now. And so the simple form is submit to us, and I'll run through the process in a few more slides, is submit to us by the contracting officers. And they submit this prior to a meeting. And there's various questions on the forum that ask, who is this data being shared with, the data type, how much, name of the contracting officer in the unit. But a question that's not listed here that we really emphasize is what is the benefit to the UCSF PI? And what is the benefit to the institution? Because anyone can come to our institutions and say, hey, we want your data. Okay, great. But what is the purpose to our institution? We can't just be giving out data willy-nilly without really asking what's the rationale, what's our benefit too. That's the duty that we have to serve our patient and participant population as well as our community. And then lastly, develop data sharing guidelines and policies. So our team manages the data sharing website, which has web-based documentation around data sharing, internal and external, as well as how-to instructions, policies, and guidelines. And the policy that we've worked very closely with for this very data sharing, need is policy 50106, which is control of access to and release of medical center information. And that's, an older policy that we had in place that we could pull some information from to make it apply here. But also, we've been working on another policy specific to UCSF-wide data sharing, and that's currently in progress of being approved. So, if you have questions on that, you can email me. I don't want to speak too soon. We still have to go through the public comment period, but that is a policy that's specific to just external data sharing, because we did find that we were receiving a little bit of pushback from the research community saying, well, is this a recommendation or do we have to do this? The high risk data sharing. And so to run through this high level process workflow, excuse me on that. So if we start here, right, we're a UCSF researcher requesting to share data externally. Okay, so we're going to go to one of the 5 contracting units that we have available at UCSF, and we're going to work with them to verify or establish a contract, right? If there's any sharing outside of the UCSF entity, a data sharing agreement, that's a BAA, DUA, data use agreement, business associates agreement, must be in place before the data could be shared. The contracting officers within each contracting unit are trained on the standard operating procedures for data sharing as well as international data sharing. And if they find that the data sharing engagement does prompt the escalation criteria, if it meets the escalation criteria, then they would submit this to the EIA steering committee for review. Now, of course, if it doesn't meet the escalation criteria, they can complete the contract negotiations and it's the end of that. But now let's look at this more complex cycle of, okay, it meets the escalation criteria. Where do we go from here? So the contracting officer would be the person to submit the data sharing intake form in conjunction with the researcher. Every team, procurement, health procurement, campus procurement, Office of Sponsored Research has their own workflow. So our team doesn't dictate how that workflow looks within each contracting unit, but essentially they have to submit this intake form. As you see in the optional section, sometimes the contract committee supervisors review this before it comes to our team, XYZ. So the form comes in and we review the intake form and assemble the agenda for the weekly EIA committee meeting. The form needs to be completely filled out. There's required fields, as well as if they're sharing participant data, there needs to be an IRB approved study, IRB consent form, any applicable HIPAA forms, as well as the data use agreement or the BAA or the data sharing contract. So once that is complete and we put that on the agenda for review at a Friday meeting, the IT Governance Committee on EIA conducts the review. More about what actually happens during the meeting in the coming slides, but if more information is required, the process starts again. The researcher has to obtain the required information. We place it on an agenda. Sometimes it's reviewed via email. and goes back to the EIA steering committee for review, where ultimately they're the ones that make the decision. Okay, is this data sharing approved? Is it not approved? And we communicate the decision to the contracting officer, the researchers, and complete negotiation. And so what does the EIA committee look at during these meetings, right? These 1 hour long meetings, what are we looking at when we look at this data sharing engagement? And so of course, there's the verification of the IRB documentation. There's the risk benefit analysis. As mentioned before, it's what is the benefit to UCSF for this proposed data sharing? What is the benefit to the PI? Contract review, making sure that the terms and the conditions align with what the proposed data sharing is. Sufficient controls for the secure sharing of data. This is also known as the IT security risk assessment. If there's going to be the sharing or the storage of this UCSF data on any third-party system, we'd want to have a successful completion of the IT security risk assessment. The mitigation of international data sharing risks. Again, if there is any sharing with any sanctioned countries, this would need the export control officer present. Privacy considerations. Okay, is this a rare patient population? How small is the sample size? You know, is the data de-identified? Is it truly de-identified? I think that's one question that we really emphasize a lot too. Sure, it might be de-identified per HIPAA, but is it a small patient population? Can it be re-identified? Is this happening in an international country? Were the patients really, did they really consent? Did they understand what needed to be done? Evaluation of any plans to commercialize the data, potential conflict of interest. This is also handled by the Conflict of Interest Office, and additional legal or ethical considerations. And so to put some metrics into place about, what has really come in to our team. So since we implemented this process in June 2019, we've had 184 data sharing engagements reviewed. As you can see, in 2019, there was 37, 2020, 57, 2021, 61, and then there was a drop into 2022, and there was only 20 engagements. And this difference is because during this year, 2021 and 2022, we actually created and implemented the escalation criteria. So before, we were developing the process, there was a lot of learning that needs to happen. But after a few years, we're like, okay, what can we do better? Do all of these engagements really need to come to the committee? And so the escalation criteria was implemented here. And you can see that there was a significant impact, or at least significant in this case, for that. And then in 2023, we've had 9 data sharing engagements thus far. Of course, we're halfway through the year. But I mean, of course, this begs the question of, are we really capturing all the high-risk data sharing engagements that are coming in? Because 184 really looks like a small number. And just to provide some examples, in 2020, we did have just the Office of Sponsored Research had over 2,000 data sharing engagements issued. And so is 57 really representative of all those that were high risk? Maybe. We'll probably need better tools and systems to assess that, but that's just to provide an example that I think this is a place of improvement for us. And just to provide further breakdown of, okay, where are these submissions coming from? As you can see, the largest lump is from the industry contracts division, right? So external data sharing with industry at 61%, where second at 19% is government contracts. The rest of the 3, innovation ventures, campus procurement, and health procurement, sit at about 6-7%. So the majority of the data sharing engagements that we're receiving is from the industry contracts division. And then we're going to segue into internal data sharing, just because external data sharing, right? That's just a piece of the pie here. So internal data sharing. So as you can see in this picture, any UCSF team member can request authorization to access enterprise data sources and derive data sets from through the standardized request process at UCSF. And likewise, any data sets extracted from the enterprise data source or data sets can be shared internally with any UCSF member who has been authorized through this standardized request process. Noting that if there is an extraction of limited or identifiable data sets, that of course IRB approvals and documentation must be in place before that is established. So what is this wonderful standardized request process that we have? Well, it's called the Enterprise Data Request Process. It's a streamlined and easy to use way to request data for the UCSF community, and it ensures that all UCSF privacy and security policies are followed. How did we implement the enterprise data request process? So we actually used ServiceNow to create this form, as well as DocuSign to assist with the attestation step. And so a user, I'll run through the various little use cases that we have here for what happens if a user is seeking to request data and then to share data through this enterprise data request process. So if the UCSF team member is seeking to share data internally, as illustrated by the top two, diagrams, if it is internal data sharing for operations, business, quality improvement purposes, the UCSF team member would submit the enterprise data request form. This form is available to anyone at UCSF. Then the form would actually prompt their manager or director approval to ensure that they can have access to this data, right? So not anyone without a purpose can access data to UCSF data sources. You must have previous approval, and if it is P4 or higher data, it needs to be approval by director or even SVP approval. So manager approval is really for the P2 data, and it's project specific. And so then this enterprise data request form on the back end, the ServiceNow form, will verify that a current attestation is on file. The attestation is, the process is handled by DocuSign, and it ensures that the person that is extracting the data is meeting the UCSF privacy and security policies, right? Is their laptop encrypted? Is there password protection? Are you going to share the data? XYZ. Of course, you can't do those things based on university policy, but it's basically an attestation to ensure that when you're working with the data, you're meeting these compliance requirements. And so if all of those steps are noted for operations, business, and quality improvement purposes, it's completed, the data could be sent. Now, for research purposes, very similar process. The user would submit the enterprise data request form. This would notify the PI of the project that, oh, hey, someone's requesting to use your data. After that, there would be a verification of the current attestation form, similarly ensure that they can access this data, verify the IRB documentation to ensure that appropriate approvals were put into place, and then the completion of that. The enterprise data request form can also assist with external third-party data sharing requests. So similarly, the form is submit. This time there's the contract verification step. If there is a contract in place, and ensure that the proposed data sharing isn't high risk. And if it is, we go back to the escalation criteria that was mentioned earlier for external data sharing. And of course, if a contract needs to be established, we would do so at this step. The contracting officer would see, does this need to follow the escalation criteria? If not, we can move along. If it does, we go through the IT governance committee on EIA review process until it is approved. The system checks IRB documentation, of course, the IT security risk assessment, and then it is completed. So this is a very fun, okay. Subjective is the word fun. I would say fun process that the UCSF members can obtain and share data. And so through this whole, internal, external data sharing life cycle, what are some of the conclusions and the lessons learned? Well, and the opportunities as well for future growth. So we've defined guidelines and policies and communications to the UCSF research community. And of course, we'll continue to do that because policies, regulations are ever changing. And especially since we have a new UCSF data sharing policy that's going to come out, we're going to have to develop procedures and training plans on that. And I think we really need to continue the education and training of the UCSF community. That's one of our, points of improvement, so to say. There's a lot of administrative steps that we are doing to ensure that data sharing is effective and we're mitigating risks to it. But we do need to continue advocating to the rest of the UCSF researchers and folks that, hey, you can come to our team for advising and consulting services. And that also these processes are in place when you're sharing data, because we don't know what we don't know, right? So as we saw the graph before, we only had 184 high-risk data sharing engagements, but that's probably in comparison to thousands of contracts that we initiate every year. So we're only gathering a small percentage of that. And what is the risk for all of the others that are getting swept under the rug, so to say? And so we need a centralized resource to also provide advising and consulting services for data sharing. Our team is the data compliance team, but I'm not sure what other UC sites are doing. Do you have a centralized team that the research community and the non-research community can come to and ask questions about data sharing, both internal and external? Are you thinking about these decisions? Maybe it's stakeholders put together, but they're not the predominant centralized source for all of this, right? We have a lot to do in our day-to-day, and this is just another thing that really was built from volunteer efforts at UCSF, but now has expanded to be a whole team, because this is a really big field that we need to think about the risks going forward. And so something that we're also hoping to do is to build an enterprise level solution to track the data sharing engagements. Currently, we're using a few systems across the board, and they're not really communicating to the best of their ability with each other. And so if we really want to get ahead of, this is how many data sharing engagements we have coming in and tracking where the data goes and XYZ, we need better systems to do so. And then another point that I'm really excited about, and also was hoping that this conversation would inspire, is to partner with other UC campuses to share knowledge. I know that maybe a few other UC sites are doing a similar process, but what is it called? What are some of the challenges that you're facing? What are your lessons learned? Or maybe the site hasn't even developed a process like this, and that's a space that we can collaborate and share ideas. So I do hope that perhaps after this, presentation today and after this conference, we can either reach out to our team or we'll reach out to your team just to get the discussion on that, because I do think that going forward, we should be in communication about, this is how our site does it, and we don't have to standardize the procedure across the table, but to have that open line of communication. And that is that. So any questions, comments, thoughts, and thank you.
Okay. Oh, there we go. So I have a bunch of gazillion nitpicky questions. I'll reach out to you later for those. But a general question that I was wondering that's come up at our site too, at UCLA Health, is what sort of vetting do you do for the IRB? Like you say, you review the IRB for something. What exactly do you check for? Because I mean, the goal of the IRB is kind of different. They're like complementary, but not always the same goals as other goals. What do you look for in that context in particular?
Sure, and that's a great question, and thank you for asking that question. So at the subgroup, the IT Governance Committee on EIA, we actually have an HRPP representative. So someone comes and reviews the consent form. Is the consent form, did it at the time of collecting this data include that we're going to be sharing data with external parties, or will your data be used in the future? Just basic, is there even IRB approval? Or was there a HIPAA waiver that was determined? Is it exempt research? Just making sure that that documentation is in place. And then, of course, looking at the language within the consent form too. And if any modifications, say that they're proposing something that was not listed in any of the IRB applications, then the IRB advises on what needs to be done to make this happen. Thank you.
Hello, and thanks very much for presenting this. A lot of things to think about, and I'd love to connect with you after. My question though about your flow chart. So first of all, how often do you say no? Like the answer is no to this contract. And then is there like a process there where the contracting unit can go back to the requester and say, this was denied and this is why, and maybe renegotiate or, correct any deficits?
Perfect. Thank you for that question. Absolutely. That's a great question. And yes to all of them. So yes, we've denied data sharing requests. Rationale for denying is, no PI accountability, or they just asked us to share the data. We don't really care. There's no really drive or motivating factor to share it, other than perhaps it's just for the industry partner and they'd be benefiting completely. So then we really assess, well, what is the benefit to UCSF here? And maybe we should be the gatekeepers to UC and UC patient and participant data. So we've said no in instances like that, or, the data sharing is, they want to then further share it, but that doesn't align with our mission as well. So we have to say, okay, we cannot share it under these circumstances. And of course, you also bring up a great point, under the proposed circumstances. So yes, the contracting unit can go back to the requester and say, the committee did not approve of this as is, but are you willing to make these adjustments? Sharing de-identified data instead of PHI, defining a term such that it's only for the length of the specific project, nothing beyond that, or all UCSF data will be destroyed after the end of the project or returned back to UCSF XYZ. So if the requester does want to make those changes per the committee's recommendation, then yes, they could do so. It'll come back to the committee for re-review and it could be approved. Interestingly enough, sometimes you can gauge the PI's involvement in the project too, because they do say, oh, you know what, this seems like a lot of work. I'm not really that interested in this project. But of course, you never want to hinder innovation and a research goal with these, again, as I said, administrative steps. But sometimes it is a good way to funnel who really was motivated to do this for their career impact or things like that. So if it was just, someone reaching out for the benefit of the company and the PI, it's like, not worth it, not the best thing, then they're welcome to also pull the plug at any point in this process too. And I look forward to chatting further with both of you. And I think, we're almost at time here. We have about 30 seconds if anyone has additional questions. So I think one more.
Yeah, there was just a question on the chat about the contracting committee. This is from Susanna Lee. Does this contract committee review process also govern sharing of non-clinical, non-PHI data like employee data from UC Path?
Yeah, so this would include all UCSF P3 data. So if it falls within the P3 bucket, which is de-identified sources, intellectual property, yes, this can. Now, if it falls under, depends on HIPAA, right? Because if there are healthcare operations, if it falls within the healthcare operations bucket, then it might not need to come to IT Governance Committee on EIA review. So it really depends on how the data is being used, who it's being shared with. If it's for business purposes, again, it might fall into that healthcare operations bucket. So I think it depends. The answer to that question, it depends.
That's time, but I encourage everyone to talk to Helena again at the end. This was a great session and thank you so much for your talk.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.